Welcome to this new automotive news video for Sunday, May 10th, 2026. Today we're going to talk about a new futuristic technology developed by BMW that will allow them to keep selling their famous six-cylinder engine for many more years. We'll also talk about Ford, which is slashing prices on its electric cars to try to clear out some of its inventory. But we'll also talk about a case involving BYD and MG, two Chinese brands that sell their cars in Europe and are known for offering their vehicles at lower prices than European brands. European customers are realizing that cheaper cars often mean lower quality. And after only a few years or even months, their cars are already showing serious problems. And finally, we'll talk about a startup that's conducting some tests on fuels that can extend the lifespan of combustion engines, and that managed to run an engine with a fuel that, as you'll see, is quite unusual. These are the topics for this Sunday. I hope you'll find them interesting. If you do, I count on you to show it by leaving a like, subscribing for future videos, boosting this one, and of course, leaving a comment to share your thoughts on today's news. We'll start by talking a bit about combustion engines, innovation, and BMW. BMW knows this very well, even as it develops the future M models in its lineup and its upcoming traditional models, so that these models always have a 100% electric version. A good portion of its customers are still attached to combustion engines, especially the inline six-cylinder engine, which is still the engine that allowed BMW to gain much of its reputation as an engine manufacturer. But here's the thing, BMW found itself facing a problem. Starting in 2027 in Europe, the Euro 7 standard will come into effect and will be applied to all European vehicles. And even though these new Euro 7 standards don't impose new pollution limits on combustion engines, they change the way emissions and fuel consumption are measured in the lab to actually get more realistic consumption and measurements, which of course doesn't help car manufacturers, who until now had always managed to find a way to take advantage of the system to show fuel consumption and CO2 emissions figures that were far from reality. Some European manufacturers are dropping parts of their combustion engine lineup due to the high cost of meeting Euro 7 standards. For example, its direct competitor Mercedes-AMG is dropping the 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder M139 engine because it's too expensive to adapt it to Euro 7 standards, as well as to the new noise regulations. BMW has chosen to do things differently and to innovate in order to preserve this engine and continue selling it even after the introduction of the Euro 7 standard. And the best part is that they're not going to create a new six-cylinder engine, but simply reuse the current S58, the 3-liter inline six-cylinder, and modify it by applying a new technology simply called Minute. So, what is this technology? I'm going to explain a little how it works. On a traditional combustion engine, each cylinder has only one combustion chamber and one spark plug. When the spark plug fires, the air-fuel mixture in the cylinders ignites and the flame gradually spreads throughout the entire combustion chamber. The problem is that as the engine speed increases, the pressure inside the chamber also increases, and it becomes harder to control the spread of the flame. Where BMW innovates is that before the main combustion chamber, they added a pre-combustion chamber equipped with its own spark plug and its own ignition coil. This pre-chamber communicates directly with the main combustion chamber through small holes between the two, to put it simply. This actually allows the engine to operate with two different modes at low and medium revs. So let's say during traditional driving. The conventional ignition continues to work normally, so with a simple combustion chamber. But when you accelerate harder, or when the revs go above a certain threshold, the combustion mode changes slightly. And at that moment, part of the air-fuel mixture is redirected to the pre-combustion chamber, let's say the secondary chamber, where the mixture is ignited separately. This technology, let's call it next-generation combustion, then generates small jets of flames that are projected at very high speed into the main combustion chamber through the small holes I mentioned earlier. This is doubly interesting for BMW and for this engine, because with this dual combustion chamber, it allows for much higher compression ratios since there is much less risk of knocking compared to a traditional engine. A third effect of this technology is that it also allows for better control of exhaust gas temperatures, resulting in a system that quote-unquote will heat up less, which should allow for a slightly more optimized use of a variable geometry turbo, and, above all, with less risk of failure. The goal of this whole system is simply to optimize engine efficiency, to reduce overall fuel consumption without sacrificing engine power. We will have to wait a few more months to see the first BMW models officially equipped with this new S58 engine modified for Euro 7 standards, and to really see what the impact is on measured fuel consumption. You shouldn't expect fuel consumption to be cut in half, but rather a reduction of around 5 to 10%, which should offset the potential increase in measured consumption caused by the new Euro 7 protocol. BMW is truly one of the first brands in the world to use this kind of system, In fact, it's even the first to really use it with the goal of reducing fuel consumption. It's a technology that originally comes from Formula One, and it's also a technology that Maserati uses on its road cars, like on the latest MC20 with the V6 Nettuno. Except Maserati didn't use it for the same reasons. Maserati used this technology mainly to boost performance, not save fuel. We'll see the results. The main question, as with any innovation, is its reliability. Won't this make internal combustion engines more fragile when reliability is becoming a top priority for car buyers? We'll see. On another topic, let's talk a bit about the Chinese brands MG and BYD. As some people like to say in the comments here, buying Chinese means buying twice. The owners of the cars we're going to talk about today won't say otherwise, since, indeed, with relatively recent models from BYD or MG, like the AT03, the MG ZS EV, or even the MG4, which are fairly recent models. Just to remind you, the MG4, for example, is a car that has only been sold in Europe since 2022. So that's just 4 years, that's all. Except that after barely 4 years, some owners of these models are starting to notice quite a bit of rust on their cars, both on parts that are mostly cosmetic, like the rocker panels, for example, or the lower parts of the bumpers. But sometimes it affects parts that are a bit more important. What we call structural elements, parts of the chassis that, when they start to be too affected by rust, can pose a real safety problem. You can fail the vehicle inspection in France if there's rust on a structural vehicle part. For your information, it's not really normal, or at least, it's something we're not used to seeing on cars from traditional brands sold in Europe, except for a few Italian brands like Fiat, which was known for rusting early about 20 years ago. It's very rare to find rust on the structural parts of a vehicle before a vehicle is about 15 years old. Here, we're talking about vehicles that are 3 or 4 years old at most. BYD responded fairly quickly, explaining that the vehicles sold by the brand all meet international standards for anti-corrosion protection. And for the cases that have been reported, MG has promised to fully cover the repairs. It's a bit less clear, though, because their warranty does cover rust for 7 years on aesthetic and exterior parts, but not on the rest of the vehicle. We're not really sure how things will go with them. What we do know, however, is that in both cases, the problem seems to come from insufficient preparation of the metal before painting. What we understood from that is that the metal wasn't properly protected before the layer of paint, which could be responsible for speeding up the whole rusting process. What is also certain is that this is not the kind of publicity Chinese brands need in Europe to grow. In Europe, we know the reputation of made in China. Chinese manufacturers understand we're aware of their reputation and realize a scandal involving their car's reliability or quality could be very damaging. Now, it should also be said that these cases have mostly been reported in Germany and the United Kingdom, two of the most humid countries in Europe. It should also be pointed out that rust is not a usual problem that Chinese car manufacturers are used to dealing with, because in China, cars simply don't have time to rust. The market is so dynamic and Chinese people change cars so often that vehicles don't have time to rust. The average age of cars in China is 6.5 years, whereas in France, for example, it's almost 13 years. In reality, Chinese brands will discover how their cars age thanks to the European market. To finish, let's talk a bit. Alternative fuel, since a startup managed to run an almost unmodified gasoline engine with a rather unusual fuel. For now, European manufacturers haven't paid much attention to it, even though on paper it allows for a drastic reduction in CO2. It's ammonia. Indeed, ammonia can be used as a fuel, but it's a solution that was quickly dismissed by most manufacturers because basically, ammonia is very, very hard to ignite. You really need very specific conditions for it to actually ignite. They developed it based on a V8 gasoline engine from the 90s. It's quite a surprising solution. So this engine has to run a few kilometers on traditional gasoline to reach the right temperatures that are high enough inside the engine. Then ammonia is gradually injected, and there's a system that recovers the hydrogen molecules from the exhaust, since ammonia is actually made up of nitrogen and hydrogen. The hydrogen is then re-injected into the engine, and it's not used directly as fuel, but it's used to keep high temperatures inside the engine so that the ammonia itself is easier to ignite and can be used directly as fuel. Which means that theoretically, this engine, after just a few kilometers, runs only on ammonia and no longer emits any CO2. It looks great on paper. Now, it's important to point out that there are still two major problems. The first is that ammonia has an energy density that's twice as low as gasoline. So technically, fuel consumption would almost double compared to traditional gasoline, which means we could end up with the same problem as electric cars, limited range. Imagine a 70-liter tank that only gives you the range of a 35-liter tank. The second problem is that currently there is no ammonia distribution network at all. You can't just go to any gas station to fill up with ammonia. So for now, it's more of an experimental technology than a real alternative for the general public, but who knows? Maybe in 50 years, we'll all be driving ammonia-powered V8s. That's all for the news this Sunday, May 10, 2026. I hope you enjoyed the video. If that's the case, I'm counting on you to show it as usual by leaving a like, subscribing, and maybe even becoming a supporting member of my channel through the join button. I'll see you tomorrow for a new week of news. Bye.